Thank you so much for coming on today, Georgie Nightingale. We really appreciate you taking the time.
Not at all. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. So for the people who might not know who Georgie is or who what Trigger Conversations is, could you give us a little bit of a rundown?
Yeah, sure. So, my organization actually started with my own problem, and my desire to solve it. The problem was really boring and frustrating conversations. A number of years ago in 2016, found myself having the same conversation on repeat, which was essentially, what do you do or how is work? And I realized that I was missing a lot of the exciting, nourishing learning conversations that I was used to, and that allowed me to actually feel connected to everybody around me. So I decided that I'd had enough, and I wanted to go on a mission to find out how to engineer more meaningful conversations. And that is how my organization, True Conversations, was born. What originally started as just events to bring strangers together to have deep, meaningful conversations using a conversation menu then became an opportunity to understand more about the kind of social dynamics at play, the invisible ones, and how you can design them to facilitate deeper connection for experiences, for instance, in events, and also then how to train the skills so that people can have these as part of their everyday lives. And that is something that I am doing right now. And it's allowed me to use many hats, everything from coaching to training, to working with organizations, and also a PhD I just started recently in human connection design.
Awesome. So what are some of those invisible social dynamics that you kind of mentioned? What's like an example of those for us who might not be familiar?
Well, let's take the whole speaking to strangers part. Most people don't. And a large part of that is social norms, which dictate often that, we don't speak to strangers, or it's not normal to speak to strangers within certain contexts. So within certain contexts, it's sanctioned. Let's take a networking event, right? The assumption is that you'll go up to somebody or you'll have a conversation and get to know them. However, if you're like on the underground, on the metro, if you're on the street, people will not necessarily see it as a normal thing. And therefore, there might be a perception of like, oh, you're weird for doing it. Or perhaps there's a lack of safety. And people will be thinking, who is this person? What is their agenda? Those sort of things are really important and always at play. Understanding what is the social context in which this interaction is happening, and perhaps how can we influence that social construct. Oh, sorry, social construct. Yeah.
So let's say we're in a social situation where it's not as common for people to, let's say you're on a train, bus ride, you're at school maybe even, and you want to have a connect with somebody, but the social situation doesn't, it makes it awkward, right?
Mhm.
The constructs aren't really pushing you towards doing that. What do we do in those situations?
Well, it's interesting you say they're not really pushing you towards doing it. There, I mean, there are environments where interaction is more forced, but a lot of the time, we have agency. We have a choice as to whether we want to go out of our way and speak to people. And I think that's one of the first parts that comes with this is, are you going to be a follower, or are you going to actually lead people and dictate the kind of experience that you want? And there can be a lot of fear around in social interactions of going first. But actually realizing that everybody has that shared fear is really valuable and important. So, when you enter into a room and you don't know anybody, it's not just you who's thinking like, oh my gosh, I don't know anybody, I wish someone would come up to me. You can be that person. And actually it's very attractive to have somebody come up to you and be confident and at ease in themselves. So that's kind of one of the things, is to realize that you're not alone, and actually you can be that first person. There's also a number of different kind of tools that you can use that will help you start a conversation anywhere. And my favorite tool, especially in situations where you're with strangers, is statements, because they're very soft and they're very inviting, and they don't have the questioning, they don't have the agenda of questions. You ask a question, people immediately think, oh, who are you? Why do you want to know that? Essentially. But if you're using a statement about the current environment you share with somebody else, it allows someone just to kind of acknowledge and notice the same thing, and they don't really have to say much, if anything, back to you, but them deciding to nod or kind of say yes or adding to it is the start of a conversation. So there's three types of statements you can use: I statements, you statements, and environment this is statements. Like, you're standing at a coffee machine. Gosh, I really need this coffee. You statements. You look surprised. You're wearing a really excellent blue jacket. Statements about the environment. God, this queue is so long. It's strange how many cheeses are available. That's a supermarket, obviously. Wherever you are, things are happening. You can look around and notice things and point them out, essentially. And not in a way that says, not in a too hard way, because sometimes people can be kind of pesty you and that's annoying. But it's more like, hey, I'm here, I'm doing my own thing, and I'm just inviting you to also notice me here doing your own thing, and we can have a collective moment together.
Hmm. So, let's say a person goes and they make a statement, whether it be about the environment, themselves, the other person. Where do you go from there, right? Like, how do you go from, wow, there's a lot of cheese in the supermarket to, um, who are you? Who am I? What are we doing here, right?
Yeah. Well, this is where the creative connections come in, because you don't actually need much to go anywhere in a conversation. I know I make a comment about the cheese, can't decide which one to buy. Chances are they might go, yeah, I have that problem too, but my favorite's brie, right? And you say, yeah, actually my favorite's brie too, but I've discovered that the brie here is never as good as the brie in France, right? So I've already laid on something, I've added something, an information, it's an offer to the other person for them to pick up. They may or may not pick it up, but for them, it helps them ask me more questions, or for them to add their own offer, their own story that relates. As I've said, brie, I've now talked about France, assuming that I've been in France at some point and I have preferences about that. So we've got a couple of subjects that are already arising. They can then add on more. If they don't pick up on my questions, I can then ask them a question. At this point, I could bring in a question and say, what's your favorite cheese? They tell me their favorite cheese. And so, it has always been your favorite cheese. Or has it changed? Or like, do you have this problem buying other foods in the supermarkets? Just staring at them, trying to work out what it is. Or like, what do you think of the supermarket? You can start finding things that will bring up more subjects. And from that point, people will give you more information. And that more information you can then expand upon and also add your own as well.
Yeah, I think that's actually really important about building off of like what was previously said, because I think sometimes we rush past topics. Like let's say somebody mentions that, they like for example, in your example, you didn't mention that you went to France, but if I was actually listening, I would have picked up on that detail. And that opens up like a whole variety of conversations that could happen. But I think like if we're not listening to what the person actually has to say,
Mm.
then we'll kind of brush over it and then end up in a dead end where we're like, okay, see you later, I guess, and then the person kind of leaves, right? So, what do you think the role of listening is in conversations? And I guess more importantly, how do we become better listeners?
Mm. Yeah, it's a great point to make. So the challenge might be that someone hears words but has nowhere to go with that, or they don't hear the word at all. And not hearing it at all can often be because we're stuck in our own head, partly because we're thinking like, what am I going to say next? What am I going to say next? And of course, if you were listening, you would maybe have something to go say next. And a part of that is also recognizing that we want to have an answer that is, or answer a question, which is really, really good, not mundane. But actually, you don't need to say hugely interesting things in order to encourage the conversation. You can just add light bits here and there, and that actually is enough. In terms of listening better, I often ask people to think about what they're listening for. So listening out for the words, yes, but then looking for the deeper meaning behind that. Part of it is, oh, that's a fact you're listening out for. Country, France, what are all the associations with France? And actually looking at the words that you get. You could get, running. You could get the name of a place. You could get someone's value, which is maybe perhaps not obvious. That's more kind of sense making. You could be listening out for emotions. You could be listening out for motivations. Listening is really hard unless you know what you're listening for. And actually having the categories at the back of your mind can be really useful. Like, I'm going to listen for facts. I'm going to listen for motivations. I'm going to listen for some element of the story. I'm going to listen for preferences. Those are the things that I can then ask the person more about.
Yeah, that's I think that that's actually a very good distinction to make that I honestly never considered until you just said it right now, which is like the traditional advice we're always given is, well, you should just, be present in the moment and truly listen to what they're saying. But a person could be saying five different things in the same statement, and it depends on what you're listening for, that's going to be the thing that you pick up. And so, like, let's say, for example, you're having a conversation with a professor, you might be listening for facts or information or details, versus if you're having a conversation with a friend, you might be looking for shared values or principles or things to do, or whatever it is that you're looking for. So I think that that's actually that's a very neat point that you made. Something that kind of pops into my mind though when I think about these conversations and when you're listening is sometimes person says something, and so you're kind of processing it, you're thinking about it, um, and you have nothing you have nothing left to reply, right? Like you're kind of left with this awkward silence, almost. Um, and it's not necessarily that you were too much in your head, but it was just because I'm just taking in what the person's saying, and I might not have anything necessarily to give back in the moment, right? So what should a person do when they're kind of faced with those awkward silences?
Yeah, it's a very standard challenge, I think. So there's a number of options. Um, if you are taking the time to digest and need more time, you can just say like, "Oh, it's a really great point. Let me think about that." Gives you a little more time. It's a permission, right? Sometimes you just need to think about that. Um, if that is the case, you can. One of my favorite kind of ways to get people to keep talking is to echo, to reflect back key words or phrases that somebody has used. And it can be especially helpful when they haven't given you much, but you want more. So, you say, I want to go, I'm thinking about maybe going hiking this weekend, right? That's a statement someone says. So you can reflect back, hiking. They go, yeah, yeah, I love hiking. I usually go in the mountains on the weekends. Actually, I'd really like to go further afar, but I haven't been able to travel much because of COVID. So you see what they've done? They've told you more, give you more details and facts. They've told you about what their interests are. They've told you about their routines and patterns. It's essentially like saying, "Tell me more. I'm interested." It also acknowledges that you've been listening and shows them that active listening skill. So it can be really helpful. And you can echo back different kinds of words. So you could also echo back maybe. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I haven't made my mind up yet because I'm still waiting to hear back from a few of my friends. We're probably going to go together. It's more fun to hike with friends. So again, you're learning more about how they see the world, what they like doing. These words can bring out so much richness. So echoing can be a really helpful thing. It's a bit of a cheat thing, but it's definitely one of the best ways to go deep. The other point I mentioned with not knowing how to respond is, again, we feel like we need to say something hugely interesting, or a lot of the time we're discarding what people have said because it doesn't sound interesting. But if we put our curiosity hat on, there's actually a lot people are saying. People talk about for instance, they say them a runner, right? And you hear like, "Oh, well, there's nothing interesting about that," either because you don't like running, or you're a runner and you know why you run. But if you put your curiosity hat on, you can first realize that it might be interesting to understand why they run if you're not a runner, because there's an interesting gap, right? Why do you like this activity where you get exhausted and muddy and get a lot of pain essentially? You can also find out what kinds of running they like. And even if you are a runner yourself, why you run might be very different to how and why they run. So it's an opportunity to let go of what your experience is like and find out what their experience is like. If we can let go of how we see the world, there's an opportunity to then see how other people see it. You know, sometimes the best conversations are where you have no idea what the other person is talking about, because then you can be a really active learner and you can ask all the questions. So I'd say that's a really poignant point as well.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times, maybe the reason that we try to say like whatever comes out of our mouth needs to be the most interesting thing in the world, right? And that's kind of the thought process. And maybe that comes from a place of like, oh, I want this person to like me. Oh, I want to be, appreciated or validated in whichever kind of way. And who knows, maybe that's rooted within, person, my own anxiety, my own whatever. Um, Again, kind of staying in your own head,
Yeah.
right? So, what advice would you have for a person who, you know, when they're engaging in conversations, maybe they're not saying their opinions because they're afraid that the person won't reflect them or won't think that it's a good point? What do we do in those circumstances?
So I think there's two things there. One of them is about sharing your own experiences, opinions, thoughts, which, as you say, sometimes can feel more scary than it is, as a fear of judgment and not knowing quite what someone will accept as permissible. And I think a lot of the time this is a limiting belief that is never that goes untested. And because it's untested, we are simply reinforcing it, right? So I teach people to break the script. Breaking the script means not saying fine to how are you, for instance, or inserting your job title when someone asks you what to do, but actually saying something that's real to you right now in the moment, that's interesting, and will allow the person to actually get to know something about you and ask you more. And a lot of people in their head think, no, that's just, they'll think that I'm weird. But they never actually have tried anything different. So you can't say that kind of thing unless you try it in a different variety of contexts as well. Chances are maybe someone will be surprised, but surprised does not necessarily mean they think you're weird. Again, we're running into storytelling mode about ourselves. And actually, a lot of people are relieved, even refreshed to discover that someone is doing something different. So I would say that accepting that there is a script happening and learning to break out of it does require a bit of courage. Everyone can have that courage. The second part of this is in a conversation, you don't actually necessarily have to share that much about yourself. I mean, I would recommend it because if we think about it, it's a dance. Equal partners need to be contributing. Otherwise, it becomes very like much an interview, a one-way thing. But you can also just be highly curious. If you're interested in somebody, then and you can think of questions, and the questions can actually create flow in conversation hugely. So adopting that mindset sometimes can be enough if you don't want to share loads of things about yourself.
What, this kind of just popped in my mind. Let's say somebody sucks at conversations, right? They're terrible. Whether it be that they haven't had any practice, they haven't gone out of their way to do it. Maybe it's because of COVID and we've been trapped at home for, a year and a half or whatever, and people haven't had a chance to go out as much and have these conversations. For an absolute beginner who has zero experience in connecting with other people, what are like three tips that you would say to get started? How do you get the ball rolling?
So I don't know any of those people because we have conversations every day of our lives, regardless of how much you've had conversations in the pandemic, you will have talked to somebody. You always go about your day talking. I mean, not necessarily every day, right? Talking to somebody, whether it is your parent or a sibling or a friend or a co-worker or a stranger who you buy your groceries from, or on the phone, customer service. You are having conversations every day. There is nobody who is not. What that means is no one is ever a complete beginner, which means you're probably actually more advanced at it than you think you are. And there might be some contexts in which you are suck, as you would describe it, or some context in which you do it well. And I'm sure that there are some in your people's lives where they do feel at ease, where they can have meaningful conversations. A lot of the time, that's with friends, sometimes with family. And then people look at their business life, their work life, or strangers, and they think, okay, I'm not as good there. That's because the context is different and other things are showing up. So what's important to recognize here is not to call yourself someone who's rubbish at conversation. That kind of thought is very damaging and very unhelpful. We all have the resources within us. We might not necessarily have the awareness of how we're doing it. That's a different piece completely. You might not know how you have such great conversations. I mean, that was partly my problem in the beginning, was there were particular people and contexts and situations where I had amazing conversations and I couldn't work out what it was that was different. So learning what actually you're doing is really important. So you can start looking at your own conversations and seeing what happens in the places where they're good or better, and then what happens in the places where they feel like they're less confident. And I would imagine people who feel like they suck, perhaps it's in context of meeting new people, because that's where a lot of people have challenges. And part of that is the anxiety around not knowing how to be, not knowing what the right kind of thing to say is. Well, the first thing we can get rid of is an idea of right. We can look around, see the social norms, but actually generally being more comfortable in yourself and actually saying hello, expressing some of your thoughts is a great invitation for other people. You'd be surprised by how many people actually respond positively to that kind of thing. So really the principle of go first is here. I would say that in terms of situations to start conversations, we'll look at the situations where they're already happening, the scripts, when we're trying to follow transactions like, buying things in the groceries or supermarket. You're already having an interaction when you buy a coffee. What are the ways that you can make it slightly more human? Actually ask for something like, not just, I would like a Americano, please. Best Americano in the world. I want the one that no one's ordered today. I want the strongest one. I want the weakest one. What do you think I should have? Or even asking somebody how their day is, or saying, you look like you're having a really busy day or a really delightful day. Whatever it is, you're having those moments already. How can you make them slightly more flavorful? That, I'd say, is a first starting step.
I think that, this connects a lot to, the point that you previously made about self-limiting beliefs, right? And I realized after you kind of pointed it out that within the question was intrinsically flawed, right? Because you're right, nobody starts off at ground zero. We all have these kinds of interactions. And maybe it's a self-limiting belief that, oh, I'm not having the interactions that I want to have. Well, look at the circles that you're in already. And rather than trying to reach out and grab something that's, not in your immediate life, focus on what you can right now, what you're immediately able to engage with, and try and make those things more interesting. Do you think that do you think it's useful at all to pre-plan these things out, right? Like, for example, let's say you're trying to engage more with, let's say, the barista at Starbucks or whatever. Do you think it's useful to say, okay, I'm going to today I'm going to talk to 5 people at, when I go grocery shopping, when I go to Starbucks, when I go at the cashier. Do you think it's useful to pre-plan these things out, or should we be more spontaneous with it? Does pre-planning it out make it more robotic and less meaningful?
No, I like planning. I don't think that you should plan conversations because that's unachievable. You don't know what's going to happen. But you can certainly plan beginnings, and especially if you want to break the script. And I encourage people to do that actually, because it's a muscle that you potentially haven't practiced. So getting into the practice of thinking about all the different things that you could say to start a conversation or break the script is incredibly helpful. And I also with statements, even if you're not going to start a conversation, when you're in a particular space, you can look around you and you can start noticing like, painting on the wall, red bin, blue bin. Simply noticing and saying things aloud helps you see things you didn't even see before, and then helps your brain start thinking of things that you could say in response to that. When it comes to like buying coffee, for instance, yeah, sitting down and writing a list of 10 different ways you can order coffee. That's a great start. You may not go with all 10, one or two might be, enjoyable, and then you can go try them. So I definitely think that that's recommended.
Awesome. Now, something that as becomes very obvious if you search up trigger conversations is the idea of deep, meaningful conversations, right? I don't know, would you say that that's kind of at the crux of what you're trying to achieve? And what are deep, meaningful conversations?
Mm. So when I first started this work, my desire was to move away from superficial, transactional, small talky scripts to something that was more deep and more meaningful. And part of the way I designed the events was to just jump straight into that, no small talk. And it was successful. The events definitely went deep fast and with people you didn't even really know. And there was something really juicy about being able to explore very meaningful topics from our stories of our lives down to right to values and to vulnerabilities and also the hypothetical future desires or controversial subjects. It proved to me that sometimes the conditions don't need to be perfect. You don't need to know someone deeply to go there. And I still believe that. However, in those experiences, people have self-selected to have that kind of experience. They know what they're getting themselves into at some point. I've created permission through the space and the container. In everyday life, you kind of need to take people there to meet them where they're at and go there together. It's a different set of social norms at play. You can't really walk up to a stranger and ask them a deep question unless you give some context to why you're doing it and they feel safe enough to consent and go there. So a large part of my mission became how do I help people do it in everyday life? And actually, a large part of that means navigating through small talk, realizing that although it might be not be the most juicy conversation, it is the gateway into depth because it provides a safety and building of trust and also creates space to find out about somebody, to learn lots of different things you can then go deep into. So it is actually incredibly useful. So I've kind of done a bit of a 360 in my relationship to small talk, realizing it can be very effective. But if we come at it with a like, oh, not this again kind of thing, we're not going to be available to listen for the opportunities that it provides. And when it comes to my definition of deep and meaningful, well, it's hard. I've been trying for years to work out exactly what that means. But I would say that there's something there in terms of a sense of feeling truly connected with somebody, like they are listening because they care and they're interested, and a sense of exploration, adventure, something unfolding, talking about the things that we feel like they matter, and perhaps going to novel places where you can reshape thoughts, not just exchange thoughts.
So, what's the right way to have small talk then? Right? Like, is it just pegging at a little bit more and trying to go a little bit deeper and like how do we have small talk the right way?
Mm. Well, I'd probably get rid of the word right. Certainly more effective versions of small talk are you can start a small talk conversation with normal small talk questions. Where do you live? What do you do? Where have you come from today? Why are you here? They're actually perfectly reasonable questions. If you do want to use them, if people do ask them, how you answer them matters. Are you actually giving your conversation partner more than a one-word answer? Where do you live? Calgary. What do you study? Why are you here? Interesting. Great. Thanks so much. Loads to go from there. I mean, I could still go with that. Like people give me one word answers, I'm not going to give up. I'm going to keep going until I get somewhere. But you can help the person out by actually sharing not just a fact, but even a potential small story. Where do you live? Calgary. But actually, I'm from. Where tell me I'm from, and I prefer it. I find that the coffee is so much better in Calgary, but can't deal with the snow. You're right. You're giving them something of substance to help them go, oh yeah, God, when I moved here originally, I couldn't bear the fact that you have to like shovel every single day, except for the fact that it gave me a six pack. I mean, I'm not sure that's true, but you can really do something with it. And from that point, you found an opportunity for mutual resonance, for connection. And you give it information, they give information, you can go somewhere else with that. So immediately we're talking about snow in Calgary, let's say. You're talking about your relationship to health and exercise, talking about the fact that you live somewhere else. All of these are new conversation topics. You can then go off in other directions. When you think about snow, skiing, cold, different weathers in different parts of the world, health, exercise, other forms of exercise, relationship to one's body. You can go off in other directions there. Living elsewhere, home as a concept, wherever elsewhere was, talking about that place, talking about transitions, talking about the reasons why people move around, different cultural differences, who lives in what places, where they live. You see the point? We can go on and on.
Hmm.
There are so many different connections coming from every different subject.
Awesome. And so, what I'm kind of hearing is that the role of small talk is to be the gateway to the connection that you seek, right? That you kind of have to meet the person where they are, right? Like you can't just expect that a random stranger that I meet in my class or on the street or in the gym, that this person is mentally in the same place as me, ready to have this deep connection, right? That maybe they have their own lives.
Or maybe even right now they're not in the right headspace, but they could be if you give them time.
Exactly. Awesome. So I want to throw a bit of a scenario at you. We ask this to all of our guests. And so imagine that you're going on a hike, right? And you want to get to this top of this mountain.
Mm-hmm.
We all know that there are things that you can bring with you on this hike that are going to help you on your journey, right? Some hiking poles are pretty useful, hiking boots, some snacks, some water. These things are tools that will help you essentially get to your goal. And so, imagining that this hike is your life and the peak of this mountain is where you're going, right? Whether it be in pursuit of a set of values, of a set of goals, of a set of achievements, whatever it is that you kind of establish as your own summit, so to speak. What kinds of tools would you suggest for people to bring on this hike with them that will help them get to that summit?
So this is tools for life, is that right?
Basically, tools for life.
Mm. That's a good question. And I probably would give different answers at different ages. Right now, I would give a. If you think about of hats, I said you curiosity hat earlier. So I would say the curiosity hat massively, large doses of that because you never really know the full picture, and it will always lead you to interesting places. Um, I would also give the enthusiasm hat as a tool, uh, basically to be keen, go out there, be excited by and be enthusiastic. That will get you brownie points everywhere. Um, the other one, other tool, is to do with your relationship yourself, self kindness, because life is hard. It has really difficult moments in it. And the worst thing we can do is start making a enemy out of that voice inside of our head and start punishing ourselves for not doing well enough. And sure, we may not reach our expectations or our goals. That's kind of sometimes what happens, but there's always a reason behind that. And learning to be your own best friend is fundamentally so important as a way forward in life, and also helps you forgive everybody else around you when they start failing, which they will to some degree. All completely imperfect. So I'd say all of those mindsets for me have been intrinsic tools in my life, and I'm sure there are a bunch of others as well, but I probably should stop at three.
That's great. Something that I really appreciate about your perspective is that I think a lot of times when we look at communication, we kind of look at it externally, right? Like, how do I change the world in front of me to be welcoming to my experience and so on and so forth. But, from what I got from yours, you talked about curiosity, talked about enthusiasm, kindness to yourself. These are things that have absolutely nothing to do with the other person, right? They have everything to do with yourself. And I guess that's, kind of the overall message that I'm hearing is that, it kind of starts with you and breaking your own script and kind of managing your own experience. And through doing that, you'll be able to open up the door to communicate, more meaningfully with other people.
Mm. Yeah, that's a great reflection. And I think um, the essence of that is we can only manage ourselves. We can influence others, but we can only manage ourselves. So stop trying to control the things you can't control. Develop a good relationship with yourself, have self agency, and of course seek out others and look to help them along the way, but also recognize that you can only influence.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on today, Georgie. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Not at all. It's great. I loved your questions. Thank you very much.
Awesome. And so for people who might want to engage more with you or trigger conversations, where can they find you?
Trueconversations.co.uk. I Yeah, I'm online as well. We have a Facebook page too, and they can sign up to the mailing list there as well. I also write on a different platform, Substack, a letter there. Um, and Yeah, you can also contact me via email, georgie@trueconversations.co.uk. I'm running courses. I'm actually running an upcoming program around conversation in February, virtually and in person. So people are interested in to learn more. I'm running some taster workshops. You can get involved in that, all on the website. And I would love to have you.
Great. Thank you so much. We're going to have all those links down in the description if you guys want to take a look. And we'll catch you next time.
Great. Thank you.
Hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. If you do, comment down below the 3 biggest things that you learned.